What's going on, everybody? Cheers. Happy Wednesday or whatever day of the week it is when you're watching or listening to this. Welcome to the With Her Two Hands podcast, where each week we celebrate the women who build, fix, and make the things that make the world go around with her own two hands. I am your host, Bogey, and I am very excited about this episode's guest. I will be joined by Katie Freeman, who is a business owner, a designer, an engineer, a custom furniture builder, a maker, all sorts of amazing things with over 2 decades of experience, not only honing their craft, but also pushing boundaries in their trade, which you know how much we love pushing boundaries here at With Her Two Hands. So I am very excited to be joined by Katie in just a little bit. But before we jump in, I want to thank you guys for being a part of this journey, this revolution, this movement to normalize seeing women in the trades, women working with their hands, building, fixing, and making things. You guys joining us every week, week after week, means so much. So thank you guys, seriously, for making this a part of your routine. If you like this series, please make sure you hit like, hit subscribe, leave comments down below. Let the algorithm know that these stories need to be heard more. We need to get them out for more people to be inspired by them, to be motivated by them, and to, maybe try picking up some tools and working with their hands themselves, so that one day, hopefully, this series is not needed and we're all just people who happen to do cool things, and it doesn't matter what our gender is or how we identify. So that's what this is all about. I thank you guys for being a part of that journey. And tonight's guest is also all about pushing boundaries when it comes to identity. So I'm really excited to have them on. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on the lovely Katie Freeman. Hello.
Hello. How's it going?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Just got cleaned up from a bunch of sawdust out in the garage, so feeling good.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice. I feel like getting sawdust is maybe easier than getting cleaned up from metal shavings and grease, like I tend to be dealing with.
definitely. Like when I've done metal work, yeah, I'm like constantly finding metal shavings in my clothing and like
Always.
random places. Yeah.
So tell the fine folks at home in a nutshell about who you are and what you do, and then we'll dive into the nitty-gritty and we can go down whatever rabbit holes you'd like to go down, okay?
Awesome. Yeah, it's hard to summarize maybe because like I've done so many different things. Currently, I describe myself as like a designer and maker. I am 2 years out of 3 years into my MFA for 3D design. So, doing the grad school route, which has taken me a little bit away from the maker community, which is sad sometimes.
Mhm.
But I know it's going to be better on the other end once I get through this. So, before that, though, I've spent about 20 years working in various industries, manufacturing industries, as a quality engineer and consultant. And then also like doing the side hustle of my own business, Freeman Furnishings, where like I make custom pieces, predominantly power carving pieces, and
Power carving. Define that for
yeah.
those who don't know what that is.
For me, so power carving can mean like a lot of times people think like chainsaw artist. I personally like I use a chainsaw to get things down to like size, but not to carve with. So I generally use angle grinders
Hmm.
with various attachments to create, sculpted like bowls and tables and even a floor lamp once. So that's
Interesting.
been, yeah, that's predominantly been what I've been doing for, like, gosh, like the first 7 years of my business.
Okay.
And then also creating content around Freeman Furnishings, working with like brand sponsors and I ran my own podcast, Crafting a Revolution, for 5 years, which hopefully will be back after after grad school. I just realized, oh, geez, I can't do it all. And also, I am a spouse and a parent to two kiddos. I think that's it in a nutshell.
That's it. That's a lot. And I appreciate that you like carved out, no pun intended there, the idea of like content creation as like its own separate thing, because it is like it's a whole
Yeah.
another career. And I
Hmm.
love when people are like, oh my God, I want to do what you do when I grow up. And I'm like, which part of it? Because
Right.
they're all different things. Like content creation is its own skill set, its
Yep.
own thing. Like not necessarily my favorite, but here we are.
Yep.
The podcasting is fun.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, I so agree. Like there's only so much that we can do at once. You said
Hmm.
something about choosing to go for your MFA, kind of taking you away from the maker space a little bit. Talk to me
Hmm.
about what made you decide to go for the MFA. What precipitated that and motivated that decision?
Yeah, I think honestly, I think kind of the pandemic might have spurred it a little
Mm,
bit. So like I was working as like an independent consultant, like I said, and going into a lot of these like manufacturing spaces. A lot of the industries that I served were um like large construction vehicle type
oh,
places, and like aerospace and med device. So I was kind of like all over the board.
and that
um,
was in your engineering capacity, correct?
That's my
Okay.
engineering capacity, yeah.
Okay.
And so when the pandemic hit, like that work kind of went down for a while and really just got me, it gave me time to like think. And then when like the pandemic started to slow down and I was getting back into businesses, I was really finding like my values were not aligning with the values of these companies that I was like going into and helping. And I don't know. I kind of started to feel really gross about helping these people make more money, and them not necessarily making like a good impact on the world from that.
Mm,
Um,
that resonates. I think that's really powerful. I think a lot of people experience that during COVID, like kind of just
yeah.
taking stock and reassessing of what what matters to us.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's a powerful thing right there, like really realizing that you've been working for companies that you don't support really at the end of
Yeah.
the day,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that you feel don't support you, probably more specifically.
Very much more specifically. I mean, I mean, at the time, I was identifying as female, and usually I was like the only female in the space. I was definitely the only queer person in the space. And like, I mean, locker room talk is a real thing. And out on the shop floor, like having to listen to it, and that's not to say, trust me, I did not keep my mouth shut. But that put me in a more precarious position most of the time when I did not keep my mouth shut. And there were times like I legit feared for like my safety. And so I was like, I can't keep coming into these spaces. At first I was a little bit like, well, maybe I could change these spaces like from the inside out, right? If I kind of like go in and just take it on like a beast. But it's like one person cannot stop the giant machine. Like it just
Mm.
cannot happen.
Oh,
So
that
yeah.
breaks. I feel you, and it breaks my heart to hear on so many levels. And I want to validate your experience and that feeling, and just and definitely the thought process there of like I can change it from the inside out. Like, and I really feel like that was my thought process getting
Hmm.
into automotive. And I think, in some small ways it does work that way, right? Because I do believe that like there's big change that happens,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then there's like the real change happens with individual hearts and minds, and when
Hmm.
people get to know somebody that they might have had biases against, and they
Yeah.
realize that this person actually isn't as bad as they thought they would be, that
Right.
like that's where real change happens. But, oh my gosh, is it exhausting.
It's super exhausting. And I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I had a legit conversation, generally with like you know, a cishet white guy, that there is no quote unquote gay agenda. I just want the same fucking rights. Sorry, I don't know if you can swear.
Absolutely.
Okay. I just want the
Absolutely.
same fucking rights as everybody else. Like, that is legit all I want. And having to break down like the number of rights that I don't have. And predominantly, like, I live in the state of Iowa, and just this last year, you know, the legislature was trying to pass 40 anti queer and anti trans bills. Luckily, only two got passed, but still two got passed. And the spaces that I was in, frankly, were predominantly conservative Republican spaces. That meant that those people were voting to take away my rights. And so I'm like, I don't know how I can, you know, survive, I guess, like mentally in a space like this anymore. And so I decided to be like, okay, how can I make a drastic career change?
Yeah.
And just started searching through. I am lucky we have a state university where I live. So like I looked, you know, on their website, and I was like, what master's programs are available? Like, what could make this work? And they happen to have a master's of fine art for 3D design, which is like, why didn't I know this thing even existed before? Because it feels like exactly what I wanted to do forever. So yeah, it was, I mean, it was a tough decision. You know, I had to talk with my wife, and like we had to make a decision. Like, I was making good money, you know, so it was a big like decision to be like, okay, I'm gonna stop making good money and go do this for 3 years. And you know, it really is like my professor, the head of the department, told me before even applying. She was like, it's a family commitment. You know, in your case, it's a
Mm.
family commitment, because I'm away from my kids and I'm away from my spouse, you know, during school year pretty much all the time. Like, I don't see them very much because it's just that busy.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I appreciate their sacrifices, and I think it can set a good example too for my kids to know, like, you can change your mind. You can do something completely
Yeah.
different.
And there's so many layers to that. Like, A, you can change your mind at any point in your life, right? It is never too
Hmm.
late to follow your passion. And you can prioritize yourself. Like, you can
Hmm.
prioritize your mental health and put that ahead of the bigger cause or the mission or the
Hmm.
whatever. Because, you know, obviously we'd all love to see change happen. But
Hmm.
I think a lot of us in these, you know, traditionally male dominated fields and traditional family norms are embraced and all of that. Like,
Hmm.
it's, you know, we take it on ourselves to be the change maker. And that's a lot to have on our shoulders. But it also breaks my heart because if we all leave to take care of ourselves and our
Right.
mental health, then there's nobody left to hold the space. And so it totally breaks my heart a little bit as well, that things haven't come along nearly as far as we'd like them to. And I think it's apropos, like today's Juneteenth,
Hmm.
which I think is, you know, there's so many lessons in Juneteenth and knowing the history of that. But I was raised to believe that so long as any of us are not free, none of us are free.
Hmm.
Um, and and I think Juneteenth shows us historically that just because there's legally protected rights does not mean actual equality. And it doesn't mean the
Right.
hearts and minds of people have changed. And it doesn't mean things have actually changed in
Correct.
real life. And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes hundreds of years for things to actually change. And we're seeing that with women in the trades.
Hmm.
We're seeing that with the LGBTQIA plus community all over. We're still seeing it with Blacks in America and really
Hmm.
pretty much anybody Black or brown in this country. So I think it's pretty relevant that we're talking about all of this today and very appropriate. Just because the laws change doesn't
Yep.
mean the lived experiences of minorities has actually changed.
Yep. Yeah. It. I mean, honestly, like, I've had conversations too. So I had a hard time feeling like I am leaving a space where I could be maybe even just like a beacon for, you know, somebody else, like a younger me in this space. And that was hard. However, again, just like for them, I think it's like, well, it serves as an example of like, you don't have to just stay and put up with this either. Like, there's nothing that says you have to do that. And I've noticed it just in like other people around my age, like in their 40s. I've had more and more like asking me questions like, how could I go back to school? Like, how could I
Mm,
go do this? And so that makes me happy. Like, okay,
heck yeah.
I'm still like influencing people to do something better with their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're still occupying a space, especially with the creator work that in content creation that
Hmm.
you do. You're still being an example of non-conforming to traditional norms and
Hmm.
doing what you love regardless and not letting anything stop you and being out and proud and loud about it and just living your life, right? Like I always say, like
Hmm.
just being you is probably the most strongest act of rebellion we can do is just living your life out loud,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I always say, like, myself and my wife going out anywhere in public with our kids is an act of protest every single time. You know, just going to the grocery store, just going to like, Target for the umpteenth time to go buy whatever the kids want. It's like, we live normal lives just like everybody else.
No. Shocking.
I know.
Right. And I get like it, but that's something that so many people take for granted. And when everyday activities are challenging and
Hmm.
then you add on top of that a work environment that's uber challenging, it just gets exhausting. And so I do not blame you for protecting what little bit of sanity and safeness that you can. And I applaud you for it. Okay, so let's talk about your business. Talk about
Yeah.
you're working on getting your MFA. You're trying to balance all of the things, having a family, having a business, getting education, creating content, being a beacon of hope. Um, you're doing all the things. Tell me
Yeah.
about your business, Freeman Furnishing or Freeman Design. Excuse me.
It is free. So I kind of,
Okay.
it's Freeman Furnishings is really what all my content and everything falls under, and a lot of my work has. I've recently just kind of not even rebranded, but branched off of with Katie Freeman Designs just to have a space that's like maybe more curated and elegant to show
Okay.
the final project. Because a lot of what I show on Freeman Furnishings is the process, and that's
Mm,
kind of what like has attracted the most people.
that
Um,
makes sense. That's
yeah,
smart. So like the product for buyers and then the
yeah,
content for makers, kind of different,
yeah, yeah,
and those who want
yeah.
to be inspired by makers.
And I'm gonna be totally upfront and honest and say I don't feel like I'm all that successful at either one at this point. If I define, if I continue to define successes, which is kind of my hope, is that it can support me and my family. Like that is financially is what, the goal is. And I'm definitely not there. And I'm, almost 8 years into it now. And so I want to just put that out there too. If you have any listeners who are like, man, I've been doing this for 5 years and I'm going nowhere, like, just want to say, don't give up. you know?
Amen to that. Absolutely. It takes time, right?
Yeah,
I think it's so easy, especially in these days of social media, to like look at the people who seem to be overnight successes and be like,
yeah,
oh my gosh, like they just started and look at them, they're so successful. Like,
hmm,
no, what you're not seeing is the 12 years of them grinding
yeah,
first, right?
yep,
And so it's really easy to compare ourselves, and so I appreciate the transparency. Like it is not a linear path, and you
no,
were doing lots of other stuff, so let's cut yourself
yeah,
some slack here. Like you've been kind of
true,
busy.
true, true. But I mean, I found it like when I first started Freeman Furnishings, like I started Freeman Furnishings as a young parent. I had like a 3-year old and like a, infant. And I found myself being like, who the fuck is Katie Freeman? Like, I don't know myself anymore. I am just like a being. that feeds and like keeps two little people alive. That is all I do
That
all
sounds
day
about
long.
right.
Yeah. Um, and so like I was like, how can I reconnect with myself and give myself something that's like just mine? It doesn't belong to my spouse, it doesn't belong to my kids, it belongs just to me. And so I was like, okay, woodworking, which I had kind of started to get into before I had kids. And so I went back to that and I started power carving from there, which I had never done before. But it was okay. I'm no longer, when I started my woodworking journey, I was like, at a community college and had access to all of these tools, and you can make whatever. But from home, I'm like, I got like a miter saw and then like an angle grinder. So what can I do with those two like things? um, and the internet uh, used that information and showed me a power carving video on YouTube, and I was like, I can do that. Like, sure, I could totally do that. um, and that's how it like started. And I kind of got hooked. Like, there's just I also happen to be ADHD brain, so like, yep. So like woodworking, being able to get like hyper focused on that task of like carving is hugely therapeutic and just like hits all the dopamine buttons right in my head. So um that's it got started with that. And of course I wanted to sell stuff, but I found myself on social media finding just like other makers and realizing like, oh, like there's community here, and that was amazing because yes, there are woodworkers and makers like locally, but we don't like I couldn't name any of them. Like it's not like we get together and hang out, and most of them are all old white dudes with like gray hair and who very much mansplain everything. So
Have you considered living somewhere else? Because I feel like where you live may, may not be the best place for you.
you're probably not wrong. There's definitely been some consideration. Um, but like the internet provided that, right? Like Instagram specifically, like I kind of found my people, and it was a space of like I really enjoy sharing knowledge and sharing information. Like I find that fun. And a lot of other makers do the same thing on Instagram. So it's like I was able to grow on Instagram and realizing like people enjoy the process. So I kind of switched at that moment of like, okay, maybe I'm not going to sell like an end product, but it appears that people are like interested in gaining knowledge from this. And so, that like I went to like Workbench Con, which was like my first big conference, and learned about like how you can use social media to like work with brands and get more than just like tools. You can actually get them to pay you to do that kind of thing. Um and then also like teaching, that gave me an avenue to like I taught at the conference, and I've taught like locally too. Like I've started getting more traction with being able to teach classes about craft. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that's
No,
kind of been the business.
absolutely. I mean, I think nothing is necessarily linear, but I love that because it also highlights how many different ways you can make a living or create income
Hmm.
using skills working with your hands, right? And I
Yeah,
think that's the cool thing about working with your hands is that nobody can ever take that skill from you.
right.
But, but being so many different ways that you can use it to make a life for yourself. You can do the thing, you can teach how to do the thing.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to do that. And so I appreciate you highlighting all of that. I'm curious. So you clearly are drawn to challenges, places, things, jobs, careers, hobbies. that are not the quote unquote norm for
Hmm.
gender prescribed or society's prescribed norms, gender roles, and all the rest of that. You were in engineering,
Hmm.
where you were a minority.
Yeah.
And then you went into power carving of all things. Um, then, in the maker space, I feel like the maker space, and tell me if I'm wrong, is a little bit more open to differences. Talk to
Yeah.
me about your experience of that, the difference between being in the engineering world and the maker space world, and why is there such a dramatic difference there? But
Yeah, I think it's because like, and I would even say like woodworking versus maker is different worlds. So like you have like your fine woodworkers, which I would say is still predominantly older cishet white men. Like that is predominantly what is in that space. And I feel like, and this is just kind of theory based on the
sure.
number of people, especially that I interviewed on the podcast and like their experience. Um, which is like, I feel like if you're going to go into something like fine woodworking, it's something like you're trying to perfect a skill, and like that attracts like a certain group of people, and it all tended to be mostly men versus like the maker space. I feel like we're all kind of like tinkerers. Like we're all kind of like we see something, we're like, I can make that. Like, it's the audacity to think that you could just see something and like make it immediately, though that's never how it works. But still, like we all have that dream, right? And I think it's also a space of like a lot of self-taught people. Like again, like fine furniture making, woodworking, a lot of times had like some kind of schooling to get to that level of skill versus makers, almost all of them are self-taught, coming from some and teaching themselves how to do that. And so I think it just, I don't know, it's like a space for all the misfits. It's like I don't know how else to
Interesting.
explain it. Yeah.
It's interesting. I've never really heard it broken down like that. It sounds both horrifying and amazing because it sounds like a whole bunch of people just like me, like a whole bunch of like ADD,
Mhm.
ADHD creatives who are like, I can do that, I can do that. Ooh, you know what
Yeah.
we can do, and then you know what we can do, and then we could build, and then.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, most of the makers have talked to, and I will say, like, for my podcast, I have almost 300 episodes. So that's almost
My
300,
goodness.
like, individual, interviews, plus just knowing the rest of the community. And almost all of us have ADHD. Almost all of us have some sort of like reading disability, reading or writing disability. And so to me, I'm like, that means we're all like spatially minded, and, and we constantly need something kind of new to keep it interesting and exciting. Like,
Interesting. That's
the
fascinating.
idea of perfecting like a dovetail joint for woodworking, I know some people that is like their holy grail. That sounds like you might as well kill me. Like, please just rip out my insides because I will go insane if all I'm doing is working on dovetail joints until they are perfect. I can't do it. Um, that's another reason why I love power carving, because nobody else knows what that thing is supposed to look like but me. So if I mess something up, nobody knows.
This is fascinating. This is a really interesting way of looking at it, and I'm like seeing it in a whole new light now. And I wonder, like ADD versus ADHD, if there's like some delineation in what types of careers that you tend to go into or be drawn to or
Mm-hmm.
thrive at. Um, because I think there is a lot of overlap, and in my mind, I think makers are people who are creative and want to build stuff and make stuff, working with their hands, and they like a challenge and they like something new
Mm-hmm.
every day, kind of like you just said. And then I think that's also construction, that's working on cars, that's
Mm-hmm.
all of these other things, but that tends to attract very different types of individuals, even though there's a
Right.
lot of overlap. Like that's what I love about working on cars. I have a different challenge every day. I never get
Right.
bored. Um, I'm working with my hands and I'm making and building, but I
Hmm.
think the makerspace probably wouldn't consider me a maker.
I don't know. See, like
Most mechanics call
I
themselves
ended up,
makers.
yeah, I ended up defining maker as basically like what you said. Anybody who, well, I say anybody who creates something with their own two hands is a maker. So that's because I'm like, it can be anything. It can be any medium that you're working with. It doesn't matter the material you're working with. Just are you creating something that wasn't there before? Well, then you,
Yeah.
you
I'm fascinated
know.
by it. I'm fascinated about the like who gets attracted to what types of fields. I'm fascinated
Hmm.
by like the different types of communities because there is such a big difference. The makerspace is known for being more inclusive and
Hmm.
more of the creatives and the industrial trades, which
Right.
is really like making like it's
Yes.
we think we are makers, but it's a
Yes,
totally different world where you
it is.
felt threatened and
Yeah.
unsafe and like you weren't welcome. Like
I
what a
think
crazy
I
difference.
think yeah, I mean, I guess maybe that's it too. Like being calling yourself a maker, most people have not made a career of that. Most people have made a strong hobby of that, right? Like they have
Mhm.
like that's a passion of theirs, but they're still working some kind of like 9 to 5 or something like that on top of it. I haven't seen, I mean, still, I was going to say the big like YouTubers, I wouldn't actually say that making is their job. I would say content creation is their job. Um, and making is just a means to get that job
Yeah.
completed. Uh, but as like you're talking about like industrial trades, that is a job. And I would say that it's kind of advertised to a certain type of person to begin with.
Mhm.
Like they're not even like advertising it to other people, right?
True.
Like it's really heavily advertised in like rural America to like 16 to 20-year-old boys. That is who is like being targeted as like come get a job as a CNC machinist or come get a and I'm not knocking that. Like it's great work and it pays really well. Like that's awesome, but it's not the same person who maybe got a CNC in their garage, to just tinker around with and make funny things with. Like it's not the
Right.
same person.
And yet I think to your point, like if it was marketed to everybody, right? If we were presenting these opportunities and these skills and these trades and these types of tools and these types of careers and to everybody, we
Hmm.
might see a very different landscape because the makerspace is testament to the fact that here is a whole group of people who are generally overlooked by the trades who would excel in the
Hmm.
trades
Right.
if given a chance and if they felt welcome and safe. And that's like, I would love to scream that off the rooftops to all of the folks in the trades who are saying, we can't find people.
Right. I
Maybe you're
know.
looking in the wrong spot.
Right. No, I hear that. The thing is, though, too, is like, I mean, not to get, I guess, too philosophical, but
Bring it.
the people who are advertising that are looking for people like themselves. They're not looking for anybody else different either, right? So, like, they're scared to like open the floodgates and actually see who would come through that door if you gave more people the opportunity. I mean, like, I've got two kiddos. My oldest is a boy and my youngest is a girl, and like if you went stereotypically, like it would be my son who's interested in what I'm doing out in the garage, and he could care less. He's like, I just want my video games, leave me the fuck alone. And like my daughter, though, I mean, she wants to be like a rock star woodworker is what she says she wants to be when she grows up right now. But she's the one who's much more interested in like, well, what does this do out in the shop? Like asking questions about tools and wanting to know more stuff. So I feel like, I mean, I really think it's a good idea to start introducing tools, and the idea that number one, we don't always have to make something, we don't always have to buy something, we could make it, um, to our kids. Like, that's if they start getting introduced at a young age, then they can start even asking people those questions when they get older of
Right.
like what kind of jobs are out there that you could use tools in. I know as a kid, I grew up with a single parent with my mom, and she didn't know how to work with tools. And even though I had this interest, like she pushed me towards engineering because she knew no other like path
Mm.
for these skill sets she saw like that I was developing. So
Which I
I
don't think
think
is
if
uncommon. I think that's
right,
pretty, yeah.
yeah. So I think we just have to show our kids like anybody. I mean, and I think YouTube and stuff like that helps with that these days. Like, I mean, my kids watch like DIY channels, like they're watching other people make things, and then that gets their creative juices flowing so that they can go create things. Um, so yeah, I think we have to start young, and unfortunately, most of our like industrial tech programs and stuff are going away. Like they don't exist anymore.
I think in some places we're starting to see them come back. So fingers crossed that
Mhm,
trend continues. But you are so right. I could not agree with you more. Exposure is everything, and I think you're right on your point of the folks who are controlling the marketing,
mhm,
the branding of a lot of these trades. Either it's out of fear, or it's out of like it doesn't even occur to them,
yeah,
right? And there's so many people who I've heard say to me over and over again, maybe the reason why there's not more women in the trades is because women just don't like that kind of work. And I'm like, I
it's not
really
true.
believe it's so not true. Like you don't know if you're gonna like something unless you've had an opportunity to try it.
Exactly,
And if we never
exactly.
give people an opportunity to try it, then sure, there's not gonna be very many of
Right,
them in a particular field.
exactly. I mean, just even like I think, like I see that your classes that you do with women, and like I have partnered with like the local community college to teach like beginner woodworking to I mean we've the first time we taught it was for women only, but we did now open it as like for women, non-binary, and trans folks.
Okay.
But like the fact that the school is willing to put that out there, like, and they advertised it, like they showed me in a workspace, like advertising it. And then even when they put out the stuff, I remember like I specifically told them, I said, because, they're just grabbing like random, what are those picture repositories full of like, that you can pay for the pictures of stuff.
Right. Yes.
I was like, okay, if you're grabbing from that, then make sure that I specifically said a black or a brown woman in the space. Because I said, you have to let people know that they are represented in the space. Otherwise, they don't know that they can do it. Like, it's not. And I remember having a conversation with somebody on the podcast who was a black woman who said like she always had an interest, but it took until she saw a YouTube video of another black woman using a tool for her to be like, oh, this is something I can do. Like, it's okay for me to go try this and do this.
Right.
And so it's like, this is when people say representation matters, representation matters. Like, you have to be able to see yourself doing that before you can give yourself permission to even try
Mm. Preach, preach, preach. Say that louder for the folks in the back. That was absolutely
it.
so spot on. I love that, like, you have to let people know that they are welcome. And it's
Mhm.
not just simply knowing inside your brain that, like, well, I'd welcome everybody. That's fine. But
Yeah.
people need to see that. And it is it's a thing that you have to actively do to
Yes. I think
show. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I think like, I mean, when I've talked to people too, when they're like, oh, we can't, people in schools are like, well, we can't recruit anybody other than like a young white male. And I said that, well, all your staff is cishet white men. So you're
Yeah.
telling somebody from the start, like they're not welcome in this space if they don't look like that.
Right. Look at your
And
staff.
so,
Look at your
yeah,
marketing material. Look at all your
exactly.
images. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, so, and then they'll be like, well, I can't find anybody. I'm like, here's what you do. You go to Instagram and you search. You can search for these people. Like, I mean, I was very specific with like who I had on as a guest on my podcast, and just like you, and it's like, you have to put the work in and actually search for these people. Like, no, is it going to be like somebody just shows up at your door and is ready to do this job? No. You have to look for the talent, and the talent is there.
The
And if you
talent
find
is
the
there.
yeah, and if you find the right talent, then you will draw more people that look like that talent. So it's like, I don't understand why this is a hard concept for people to understand.
There is so much that I don't understand why it's a hard concept, but yet here we are in the world today.
Yeah.
We we are making progress. We are making
Yes.
change. It just never happens as quickly as we'd like it to.
Correct.
I specifically with, I mean, you deal with a double layer of things, right? As a woman, as non-binary, as LGBTQIA, like
Hmm.
all of the things, you kind of have a couple of layers of stuff going on, and so you know that things have not got, they're not perfect yet. Lord knows we have a lot of change to make. But I
Right.
think about, so I don't talk often about my sister, but my sister was born my brother, and came out in 1996.
Oh, bless their heart.
And oh my God, what a different world it was
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
then. So I think about that, and that's like my litmus test of like, or like my
Yeah.
reminder, I guess, like, okay, things are changing. Things are changing,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
not fast enough, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. And unfortunately, I mean, I do want to say that unfortunately, right now, not just in the US, but worldwide, some extreme conservative people have decided to make trans people specifically the boogeyman. And it is legitimately worldwide that trans
it
people are
is.
being targeted in legislation across the world. And so things have changed, but I think we are all being horribly reminded that just because the law was okay, it can be taken back, and it
Mhm.
can get scary real quick. So
Absolutely.
I do want
And
to just say that. Say
absolutely.
that.
No, you were absolutely right. And change is not linear either, right? Like,
Right.
we've been kind of saying throughout this episode, it is not linear. And I think, 10, 15, 20 years ago, people didn't even know what trans was, right?
Right. Correct. Yep.
Now it's being talked about. There's awareness, there's more acceptance. But with that
Hmm.
comes the backlash.
Yep.
And it's awful, and I wish it weren't happening. However, like I almost, from a philosophical standpoint, like from a understanding
Hmm.
how change happens, like I feel like the backlash is like an indicator that like stuff's changing and it's making people
Yeah.
uncomfortable. So it's both like
Correct.
good
Yep.
and bad, right?
Yeah.
Like that means
Yep.
stuff is happening and it's
Correct.
scaring some people, but stuff is happening. And then if we can get through the backlash to the other side, that's
Yep.
when hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, you are correct. That's the sign that you're doing something. I mean, I oftentimes will think of like, civil rights movement of like the 60s. And I mean, there was definitely backlash, right?
Mhm.
I mean, people were murdered, people
Yeah.
were hurt very badly.
Yeah.
Um,
And still to this
yeah,
day, right? Like
yeah,
Black and brown people are still not
yep,
completely seen as equal. They are still not always safe.
yep,
Women,
yep,
LGBTQIA, like any minority
yep,
group, as long as one of us is not free, none of us are free, right? And
Correct.
that's
Yeah.
the important thing to kind of remember, I think, that
Hmm.
we're all in this together. This has been quite the intense conversation. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Maybe I should have prefaced, you're not going to get light, fluffy stuff with me.
I love it. No, bring it. I am all about it. So since we're in the philosophical and the deep, I feel like there's probably something to this for you. Your art, your furniture, your design, what you build and make, um, tends to be really organic, very freeform, very, dare I say, non-traditional.
Yeah.
Um, tell me what that's all about and how does that have to do with all the rest of what we've been talking about? Is it coinky dink? Is it intentional? Is it just
I mean, I would say like probably pre grad school, everything was maybe quinky dink. Though, again, if I was to get kind of philosophical, I would look at it, deeper and say that, yeah, I mean, I've always been drawn to nature. Like nature is what grounds me. Like if I'm freaking out, just get me like out on a hiking trail and give me 10 minutes and I'm like good. But like I'm really into kind of diving into like what makes nature work, like what makes all of these things work together. And so like for a really long time and still now to a degree, like big bodies of water were always my big inspiration. And so a lot of that kind of free flowing curvature, like organic form, was definitely drawn from just kind of like sitting with bodies of water and what they do. Um, I would say I'm more intentional now, and a lot of what's come out of my grad school work is actually much more like geometric forms, which when you go microscopic on nature, you find geometry, which is mind blowing to me, right? Like you look at a leaf and you're like, oh, it's so organic and free flowing. But if you zoom in on it, there's like a ton of hexagons in that thing, making it all like work together. Um, so there's still that, but also I feel like I've kind of taken like my gender journey has been more recent. It's been through grad school that kind of like let me feel, I guess, safe enough and free enough to find myself in that way. And I have done some thinking of like, okay, I maybe am moving more from the, I want to say like softer edges of like when someone thinks of like feminine, more soft curvatures to a little bit more, there's edges on my work now, which I feel is more masculine and maybe more representative of kind of where I'm at personally. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that.
there was no specific answer I was looking for. That is, if it was true to you, then that is perfect. I love it. It's very interesting explanation of your work. I think
Hmm.
it's fascinating. Art and creation is always such an interesting thing because it
Hmm.
does ebb and flow, and it
Hmm.
changes as the maker changes, as the
Right.
builder, the creator changes in anything. So
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. Okay, so we don't have a ton of time left, so I've got a couple of questions. Um, it, you've left engineering,
Hmm.
you've closed the door on that. I'm sure it comes into your work. You're doing 3D stuff and whatnot, so there's some engineering that comes in there. Do you miss it at all?
Nope. There's nothing. If anything, I probably would say I have a deep fear of what happens after I graduate and how do I keep myself from having to maybe go back to that space because that's like, that is comfortable, right? It's like, I mean, not to brag on myself, but I know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, I know what I'm doing in that space. So it would be easy to just go that route and be like, okay, I'm back to making money. That was a fun, like, 3 year hiatus. Um, but I don't miss it because design is also problem solving. That's what I liked about engineering was the problem solving, and design is problem solving, right? You're given a set of restraints that you have to work around and make work. And it has to be something you can actually physically make. So there's also all of that, wrapped up into it, plus the creative side. So I think, yeah, I don't think I could go back to engineering.
Is there, if you had a magic wand and could change the reality of what being in engineering looked like and felt like, and the experience of that, if you could change that, um, A, what change would you make? Like, what would you do with your magic wand? And B, if those things were changed, would you happily want to go back?
I think, and this is not necessarily, honestly, not just engineering. I think as a whole, the way that at least American corporations run need to be drastically changed to focus on the well-being of the team that is creating the work. So I think if you could change it so that it was focused on people focused versus money focused, I would go back to any engineering or corporate job, ever. Because of course I want like stability. Who doesn't want health insurance? Like everybody wants those things. But every place is so focused on the bottom line that they forget about the people who make that bottom line happen. So if I had a magic wand and could just make it be more people focused, and I would say teams focused. I think people work really well in teams instead of in silos, like a lot of things tend to happen.
Yeah.
Those two things would definitely make it more
All right, we
likely.
need to get you a magic wand because excellent. Yes. I agree completely. People focused, team focused, actually being respected,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Feeling respected for who you are, no matter what,
Yep.
and what you
Yep.
bring to the table. Amen.
Yep.
All right. Final question.
Okay.
Final question. If you had the opportunity to talk to a little baby you, or another individual out there who is watching this and saying, "Oh my God, like I totally see myself in you." What are your words of advice for them?
Hmm. Always lean in and find what you have in common with somebody and be open to wherever that takes you. Stay curious.
Ooh, I like that one a lot. That's a good answer. Mm, I'll let that sit for a second. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I love it. This has been fantastic, Katie. I've so enjoyed meeting you. I love our little philosophical conversation. This has been great. And I really appreciate you agreeing to be a guest. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you so much for asking. I really appreciate it.
Heck yeah. And folks at home, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed meeting Katie as much as I did. Make sure you go follow along and check out their work. I will have links in the description down below so you can check out their website, check them out on social media, check out all the cool work that they do, and follow along on their journey as their career continues to unfold. And we'll see where it goes, and we'll see how their art continues to develop. So thank you guys for being a part of this series. Make sure you hit like, hit subscribe, leave comments below. And if you think there's somebody out there who could use to be inspired by Katie or by any of the past episodes of this show, make sure you pass this on and get it in front of them. Until next time, guys, be good to yourselves, be good to one another, be good human beings, and we'll see you.